Are you trying to recall what I learned? How do you know if you forgot something? I don't. I'll know afterwards, Granola. I start the day with knowing what I do know, and then I follow the day up by reminding myself of the things that I have not forgotten but cannot recall from use cases. Asian teachers in general don't like to really learn more about their language. That is kind of actually fair. However, instead of saying Asian teachers, I would say monoculturally inclined, monoculturally normalized people don't have much motivation to rediscover their language or continue learning their language. It's also one of the normalizations of English that makes English's standardization, the bottom line for English, is very low. Like, for example, if you're, a lot of times people refer to the United States, average English level, probably high school. You don't learn anymore past high school. So why are native speakers so heavily praised? They're the majority. They set the standards. They set the standards. So if you excel at a language, like for example, if you excelled at English, you will sound unnatural because you're not the normal. You're not normalized. Like, not everyone sounds like a politician, for example, but a politician executes at a higher level on average in English. So that's why when people say, oh yeah, native speakers, certainly, but there are different types of native speakers. There are specialized speakers who sound unnatural, and there are speakers who sound natural. Natural is colloquial. That's the idea of colloquialism. The normalized statistical average is the most normal thing. So do I sound normal? Typically, I don't. That's why people listen or take notice. My vocabulary and my diction is quite different from the normal streamer, right? The normal streamer has a diction that is very stereotypically different. I'm not saying bruh to mean 45 different things right now. Bruh, right? So I would sound unnatural technically as an English speaker, or I would be an unnatural streamer on Twitch because my diction is different. So oftentimes I don't necessarily enjoy or like to think about when people start using words like natural and unnatural and casual and hardcore. It's very difficult to tackle that question. Native speakers don't necessarily mean they're competent speakers. And then competent speakers don't necessarily mean they're skilled speakers. You can be skilled without sounding native or like natural. And natural sometimes is interchanged with being native, but a native speaker doesn't sound like me. I'm gonna be real. The diction and the vocabulary and the esoteric verboseness, that's not how most Americans sound. The way people determine that I'm American is based on my accent, not on my diction. So, however, it tells people how educated I am, I suppose. Like, for example, I don't sound like someone who is at a high school level. At least I don't think so. I don't intentionally try to sound like a high schooler. I don't want to be deceptive in the sense that, oh yeah, look at me, I know a lot of things, and then I undermine my own credibility by, trying to mislead someone in using diction that doesn't reflect my educational level, that kind of thing. But it's very unnatural. The way I talk and talk to people, I generally excuse myself. Like, if someone says, oh, English is my second language, I have to consciously try to not sound unnatural, like as in uncommon, because it'll be very hard for someone to understand. You don't use words or turn of phrases and be incredibly esoteric. Like, sometimes I do it because that's what I want to do. I want people to understand me the way I am. However, I have to be very sensitive to the idea that when you phrase and present ideas in the language that you command, you may not sound natural if you know a lot about something. It usually becomes incredibly esoteric. The problem with learning from a native speaker is like a rich person who was born into a rich family, how to get rich. Yeah. It's very difficult. You have to, in my opinion, pre-selection is very important. Determining a person that has empathy and being able to realistically have overlapping experiences is probably a gold standard. So this is a hot take, actually. This is a hot take. Many people, in my opinion, I've already been fought against by this. I prefer someone who's able to empathize, like say like if you're British, if you speak Brazilian Portuguese and you found a Brazilian Portuguese streamer who's learning Japanese and you want to learn Japanese, to me, I prefer that that person seek learning experiences from that person and acquire the accent, whatever that accent is, than taking their chances with someone who cannot relate to what what their steps are. Like I don't know. It's not as bad. It's not as startling if it was like an American English speaker. But if you go into native English, like if you go right to a Japanese person who perhaps didn't even bother learning English or Portuguese, it can still work. I'm not saying it can't work. Just like Duolingo can work, but it will take a different path. It wouldn't be a gold standard. The gold standard is having a person that quite literally have gone through the steps that you would have. That is like the ideal case. Does that happen very often? Not really. So the idea is you keep stepping down and you keep finding something that's relevant, right? Before focusing on a gold standard that involves X, Y, and Z, so many possible givens. Like for example, many of the strategies, in my opinion, that are optimal, quote unquote optimal, it is under the assumption that this person has no lack of motivation. So they have a lot of motivation. They're self-motivated. They are competent about their competency, their proficiency. So these are all the axioms, the axia, the things that are assumed so that these approaches work. You learn excellently from a native speaker if one, you want to be a native speaker, you want to stay native-like, you have no problems being in an environment that is completely ostracized from your original common language or mother tongue. So there are all these conditions you must meet in order for a native speaker to be useful to you. And that is the assumption. So before you check into your methods, you want to know, a lot of times people must disclose this. You must disclose as an expert how relevant you are, because you're dealing with the human component here. So yeah, do you want to sound like a native speaker or do you want to learn Japanese? Because those don't necessarily have to be the same thing, right? You can learn Japanese without sounding native. So the question comes up to, like, you have to ask yourself, oh, I want to sound native. I want to learn from a native speaker. Go find a native speaker. And then because it's a choice that they made, they accept all the pros and cons about it. Do I want to sound like a native speaker? It's desirable, but it's not a necessity. I don't go actively seeking a native speaker. If a native speaker just randomly falls into my lap, oh heck yeah. Like, come, let me learn from you, right? However, it's not a priority. So you gotta know your priorities, and it's lots of the methods deal with a level of self-awareness, and you have to be able to measure that before you can do it. Like the whole Krashen theory on secondary language acquisition, there's a lot of ifs, lots of ifs. You've already come with all the life skills of self-evaluation. You have a support system for emotional support if you have like negativity problems. You are not socially inept, as in like you have no combats with social awkwardness or social anxiety. There's a lot of things. You're well conditioned. Like it's required to meet a lot of circumstances in order to optimize for those methods. But at some point, it's still up to the user. And not everyone has that luxury. And not everyone needs to be self-aware at that level. It'll work out if you have an overall combination of approaches, at least in my opinion. I see native speakers in this way. Native speakers are like the final boss in a video game, and so many people skip to the final boss and don't gear knowledge about the game mechanics to deal with it. That's interesting. And it is promoted heavily. Interesting. So that can be it if you're thinking about the bottom-up approach. Some people do the sink or swim approach, so trial by fire. So if you skip to the final boss, right? However, if the boss is not mechanically hindered, as in the question you have to ask yourself is, are you mechanically hindered from completing the boss, right? There's a difference between an unachievable boss and an achievable boss. Well, in some cases, when a boss is not mechanically hindered, someone may just skip to the final boss, continue to do the final boss, and eventually develop the mechanical necessary for the final boss, to go clear the final boss. Lots of the things that people are afraid of, the insecurities about always knowing enough knowledge, is that there might be some, hindrance, as in it might not be possible to clear the boss. And that final boss is whatever your goal is, right? Without existing knowledge. So it's a balance between them. I err on the side of just enough knowledge to gain ground. If I can't gain ground, then I go find more knowledge. Knowledge is a facilitator of progress, not a determinant of progress. All the knowledge in the world does not create practice. So if you continue to spend all the time collecting knowledge, you also lack experience. So I collect enough knowledge to gain experience. And then that experience dictate if I need more knowledge. And sometimes they go hand in hand. So that's kind of the medium ground. I try not to spend too much time gathering knowledge where my experience can dictate what type of knowledge that I have. And this is contentious because in the field of secondary language acquisition, most people think that output is astronomically less relevant than input, right? The value of input is dramatically, this is also one of the gold standards. The value of input is greatly outweighs the output, especially in language acquisition. And I totally agree with that. Language acquisition, right? That's fine. Language acquisition. But I'm not so sure about learning. And what I mean by that is learning requires other things. Motivation, feedback, which may contribute to acquisition. However, we make this distinction between acquisition and learning, right? With output, if you have a balance of output and input, it can feed back onto its motivation to learn. So the thing about skipping to the final boss and then just keep doing it, like focusing on like output, and then that output creates feedback for input, that's kind of the idea, right? But both. I engage in both. I do output to inspire input, while spending a few, separate sessions and other things to gather input to bolster my output. So, just not long ago, 2 days ago, I think it was yesterday actually. Yesterday, someone said that they did all input, right out of Fashion's book, I suppose. They did all input, and they told me that they went to Japan afterwards and was able to only output. I don't know what that means, but I can tell you that if you're doing all input, you're still outputting something. When I'm doing this, like when I'm recalling this is output right here. And then Granola asked me, am I trying to recall what I learned, and how do I know if I've forgotten something? By inputting. So I go through periods where I output. If I have enough knowledge, if I have enough input, I'll practice output with my current knowledge, and then I will continue to do input. The output is necessary to determine my current competency. If I don't regularly check my current competency, how would I be able to participate in comprehensible input? It would mean I would be completely dependent on a tool or a prescription by someone in order to determine where I am. And even when you do that, you still need to output something to determine where your current competency is. So being aware, you need to be self-evaluating. So you need to, in my opinion, one requires to find out where you need to measure, when, where, how you need to measure every once in a while. So regardless of your progress, how do you feel about your progress so far? If you're constantly inputting, you cannot, I disagree that you would be able to accurately know where your competency is. You need a form of output in order to consistently measure. So the gold standard is not to do all input. The gold standard is not to do output and then get input. My opinion is you find the balance of output and input that you can consistently do, that provides motivation and feedback, that allows you to develop enough awareness of where you are and what you need. So jumping to the final boss means, are you ready to jump to the final boss? Not what someone thinks you're ready. Are you ready to go to the final boss? Because when you are ready, then you get her done. At least in most under the assumption that all the knowledge you need is available, right? So like the final boss, if you do the final boss knowing nothing, but you know that the knowledge is in that final boss, where are you? Are you prepped? Do you need more knowledge before you approach it? It's the final boss. What's the final boss? To talk to someone with Japanese, like for some people, the final boss, right? I can do that anytime. Does that measure my level of competency? It doesn't. Like I wouldn't know how competent I am. But I would do the final boss anytime. If a native speaker suddenly says, "Hey, Maku, I have 30 minutes every day. I want to be your friend, and I want to speak to you for 30 minutes every single day." Heck yeah, let's do it. Am I looking for it? No. Am I ready for it mentally? Yes. I'm absolutely ready to interact with the people. I already talked about this when I was playing Neverwinter, but I look forward to the final stage. It's not because I need to gear myself. I expect myself to sound unnatural I expect myself to learn when interacting with a human being. I always expect this. So I know that I won't be ready for the final boss. That's the difference, in my opinion. If you truly are an enlightened person, you will know that even if you think it's the final boss, it's not the final boss. Right? You continue to live. There's life beyond the final boss. So you're never ready. One of the most valley of despair going to enlightenment is that you're never ready for something in the ideal way of the way you're thinking about it. Like predicting the future. You are always up for the challenge when you're ready. As in, like some... I think this is enough recall, by the way. I'm gonna move along here. Like, for example, parenthood. If let's not, we don't have to use language. We could use parenthood. You can know as many things as you can possibly want outside of predicting the future, right? Outside of it, right? Predicting, I can't spell predicting. Predicting the future. You are never ready for the future, as in like ready in the sense that you can predict the future. So concerning yourself with being that ready is, in my opinion, not understanding the human condition. You cannot predict the future. The idea is you're readying yourself. Do you feel comfortable enough to tackle the boss? I am. Anytime. Do I have to? No, not really. If the opportunity presents itself, sure. Right? If the opportunity presents itself, no matter what, I will continue to learn Japanese until the next time I can use it, which is probably sometime next year. Right? One of the downsides of this is it could slow your motivation. Right? It could make you complacent. There are trade-offs. Your complacency can sit in. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I have a year, procrastination sets in. Fair enough. Those are the pros and cons, right? We have to weigh all these things. Your motivation could go down, you could be complacent, and that's definitely something to concern yourself about. For those who are rushing into things, right? Optimizing, that's a different story. Oftentimes rushing and optimizing creates incompetence, right? Or it may lead to incompetence. It's a tough thing to answer, really. In that scenario, it's like when you get the boss as a playable character. True, that can be a thing. Yeah. So I don't have to talk about language, but we can talk about parenthood. I like to talk about life skills because I think language learning is fairly close to life skill. I would honestly say though, it is both. It's a mix of both. I think getting caught up in what is the ideal form it goes against the human condition. So if you're doing something, say if you're, and this is like an exception, it's one of like the stereotypes. If something involves human interaction, in my opinion, I can make the argument that everything involves a human interaction. However, we're not going there. That's like philosophy stuff. Let's just say pragmatically, if it involves a human interaction. You have to understand the human part of human interaction. You keep throwing around words like natural and unnatural. You know what's you know the irony in here? If you're talking about perspective on natural and unnatural, it is literally already unnatural for a Japanese person. To see a not Japanese person speaking Japanese. So if you have that perspective as a person who's not Japanese, who's speaking Japanese, why are you concerned about being unnatural? The reality is that you are unnatural to begin with. Now, it might hurt your pride to accept that, but it is also the path to enlightenment. Right? If you want to exit out of the Dunning-Kruger's incompetence, you have to understand that there are things you won't know, you don't know, no matter how much you try. But the idea is to be acceptant of it and continue to strive for competence, like to meet a sustainable relationship with it. There's nothing I can possibly do, in my opinion, for myself. No matter how much I want to do something, I will be thinking about things that a Japanese person does not think about. Even if this person learns English and tries to teach me with a method that combines English and Japanese, it is not natural for an English speaker to connect with a Japanese speaker who speaks English. So to be acceptant of that allows one to not have to concern themselves and worried or be frustrated about oh yeah, this gold standard, I don't agree with this gold standard. I don't agree with what this is forced upon. Well, the idea is you're able to do it in your own way and be inspired by other people's ways, right? I personally prefer, in my opinion, an English speaker who has acquired Japanese to inform me on how to sound naturally like an English speaker who speaks Japanese. How's that for meta level of cognition? Because I want to connect with an English speaker who speaks Japanese just as much as I want to connect with a Japanese speaker who only speaks Japanese, or maybe some English. But the reality is that Japanese person can't ever connect with me on a level that an English speaker who learns Japanese can. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? I'm trying because I want to. I want to connect with a Japanese person. But to me, it's ethnocentric. Oh, I can't even spell ethnocentric. It's ethnocentric both directions, right? When someone is trying to learn someone's language, they are a foreigner, right? When someone only knows about they're xenophobic. To know others back and forth is to be less xenophobic, in my opinion, or less weirded out by unnatural things, right? So that's kind of how I feel about the whole thing, regardless of what people think and how they learn. I am perfectly content and acceptable that if I continue to only speak to English people who decides to learn Japanese, I'm content. I'm doing more than just staying with English. I'm also doing more than the Japanese person who only knows Japanese and who tries to educate English people in Japanese, right? That's different from a Japanese person who wants to understand English people who also is learning Japanese. It's very different. So the person I'm looking for is a Japanese person who has learned English, who likes American culture, and know that lots of Americans like Japanese culture. And that connection is something far rarer in this situation. I can't even emphasize how much rarer this situation where you have a Japanese person who's interested in the American culture and an American who connects with a person who's interested in the Japanese culture. It's so much rarer. Most of the time, it's a Japanese person who's learning English because they have to, quote unquote, have to. And then they make comparisons by prejudicially of favoring their own culture. That's ethnocentricity. I mean, if there's any country that gets accused of ethnocentricity, a lot of times it's Americans. So I mean, I live in a country that gets accused of ethnocentricity all the time. But you know what's funny about that? Japan houses 99.9% of native speakers. If we're talking about language in a scope of ethnocentricity, it's Japan. It's one of those countries. It has a incredibly high influence. An incredibly high influence that's disproportionate to how ethnocentric their language is. And that doesn't stop me from trying though, because I love their culture. I really love Japanese and their culture. But there's no denying the fact that Japan is so impressively influential on the world, and yet they have easily one of the most ethnocentric and xenophobic language exposure of so many countries. And you make the same argument for the United States? No, you can't. Because you might find like 30% of English speakers in the United States among the entire world's population. So yes, the United States is quite influential, but at the same time, the language it uses, it's not disproportionately enriched in the United States. As in, if you decide to learn English, the gold standard isn't sitting in the United States. It's not sitting with any American English speaker. Am I gold standard for English speakers? The answer is an incredibly resounding no. Like, I don't actually think if I were to walk into a room, I get surprised, right, weirded out, because I'm ethnocentric, right, because I'm on a small island. I do honestly feel like I'm on a small island. When I walk into a room, if I can find someone who remotely sounds like me, like the way I use English and stuff, I am like the best buddy with this person. Immediately, it will be a connection unlike any other. It's like finding an English speaker who likes Japanese, who then went on to teach Japanese to English speakers. And then I happened to do this as well. The moment you meet this person, man, they are your best friends forever, right? It's you need this to happen, this to happen, this to happen, and this to happen at the same time. It's such a low percentage, right? Low percentage. But what Japan does not have is they don't have people outside of Japan. They do not have enough people outside of Japan to even create a gold standard or any standard outside of Japan. I mean, it checks out, right? The logic checks out. What is the best way to learn Japanese? Go to Japan. What is the best way to learn English? I don't know that answer. So, good luck. Good luck with that answer. Like, good luck. So we're talking about the influence of a language, right? We're talking about the influence of a language. Yes, it is very frustrating when you're trying to approach a language that there's a gold standard determined by people you can't be. you can't be these people. You cannot be Japanese if you're learning Japanese later. You are not. I mean, there are some extenuating circumstances. Like for me, I'm about to tackle Mandarin after tomorrow. We're gonna balance Mandarin, and where like even then I'm not Chinese. It's so hard for anyone to say, to look at me and say, oh yeah, you sound like you were born in China. Like, no, you don't. Unless you really try hard to, it's perfectly fine. Like what you want to do isn't what the reality can be, right? So the idea is being acceptant of what isn't, what can't be, or what you don't know, and do your best. And I truly think that is the state of enlightenment that is desirable for someone to be very happy. Like, you do you, but in a genuine way, right? So this in my opinion is one of the big notions regarding highly influential places. So highly influential places, but their language is completely segregated. And if that segregation, if that gold standard doesn't appeal to you, as in you don't resonate with this gold standard, tough luck. Tough luck until they become more influential. The best, in my opinion, the most reasonable case you can hope for is pave your way and change, counter influence, spread the influence. So if I wanted to be an English speaking Japanese teacher, right, I would try to change the amount of people that are doing that. So what is a great way to do that? Find a way to encourage more English speaking people to learn Japanese. What's ironic about this after my journey in Japanese learning is that most people who are English speakers who want to learn Japanese, they want to become Japanese. Ironically. And it's through normalization. Japanese is highly influential, but it's highly segregated. So what happens is the people in themselves join the segregation. So then you have less people being motivated to learn Japanese. Because if you don't want to be Japanese, you can't learn Japanese properly. That's a huge barrier. I want people to both speak English and Japanese. Not just Japanese. In fact, hello there, Canon. Some people that I spoke to who I still resonate because they speak English, they would give up English to know Japanese and like other Asian languages. So me and those people, we can get along. Like, it's not like you can't get along and reach an impasse, but I wouldn't give up English. For me, I want to keep English and also speak Japanese, right? It's different. So whenever someone says, oh yeah, you need to immerse, like, no, I don't. I don't want to immerse. I want to be English and Japanese at the same time. When I watch movies, I don't necessarily immerse in movie. I think about the movie. And that's a choice. It's a personal choice. We have to make it clear. Like, if you're expressing that, then people won't get you mixed up, right? I like to think about the movie. I think about the writer, the author, how I relate I relate to the writer and the author, as in me, my identity, and how that impacts my interpretation of this person's work. When you immerse, you are losing yourself in it. Losing yourself in it. Like you are trying to lose yourself in it. Willingly. Willingly. I want to go to Japan and share the richness of my heritage while enjoying and participating in their culture. I want to learn Japanese, but also be able to encourage Japanese people to be interested in English. When you're trying to become native, this doesn't help. It doesn't help you. And I totally understand. So if you're not interested in spreading your own culture while participating, like culture exchange, if you're not interested in culture exchange, that's perfectly all right. Because I think the vast majority of people who learn Japanese wants to become Japanese. So they participate and almost become, like, ironically, here's the thing. Like, I don't know if people notice, but you do actually kind of become Japanese. But the thing is, the people who want to become Japanese can't be Japanese. So then they're constantly struggling on trying to be something they cannot. And they use that to project it onto someone who doesn't want to become Japanese. I want to culture exchange with a Japanese person. Because I'm not striving to be something I can't be. So then the standards are different. Like, how do you learn Japanese? Don't think in English. Do not think in English. Right? Like, okay. I mean, everything about me and why I learn what I want to learn about Japanese is also important that I know what it means in English. Right? When a Japanese person asks me, what does this mean in English? And then you're like, I don't know. It means this. It's like, well, okay. And that's the bane of native speakers. In my opinion. It's not okay, it's a bane in the context, Gabriel, of what you're saying. Native speakers are concerned, if you're a native speaker, right, and they are more statistically likely to be concerned about their own language's importance. That's great. So they're a source of great knowledge, right? But if they're not, however, the emotional intelligence and the relevance can vary, because if they're concerned about their own language, what are the chances that they are concerned about your language? Right? Most of the comments and criticism you get are from other people who are learning the language. When you get critiques from a native speaker, their frame of mind is most statistically likely to be in the frame of mind necessary for their own proficiency. That can be very helpful, provided you have enough knowledge, right? What you said, Gabriel, to make yourself feel ready. Make yourself feel ready to engage with the native speaker. Because to me, a lot of times when you engage with a native speaker and you don't determine if this native speaker is multicultural or multilingual, and what I mean by multicultural is multiculturally curious, they don't care about your culture. I know how that sounds, but they don't. They really don't. They care about teaching their language to you the best way they know. Right? Right? They're like, oh, you want to learn our language? This is the best way to learn our language. Like, how often do you know about my culture? Like, do you know how I learn my language? Is there any way you can, like, do you have any inspirations to speak like you but understand that my language has certain things that makes me do certain things? So they can't possibly know that if they're only concerned with their own language. It's very difficult, and it's not a bad or a good thing. The reason why they're probably very good at their language and they don't even need to process how to speak is because they're largely concerned with their own language. So it's great for observation, in my opinion. It's great to observe a native speaker. It's great to interact with the native speaker. If that native speaker is not interested in your culture, their advice is very not relevant because they can't possibly know what you're going through. And I totally get that people need to be prepared, and I'm prepared. I don't really care when it happens, honestly. If a native speaker just comes up to me today and say they have the time and place to culture exchange with me in language and culture, anytime, because that's an opportunity of a lifetime. You do not often meet another person who mutually wants to learn about you, gain experience from you, and you gain experience from them. It's totally different when someone is teaching you a language and they care nothing about your culture. Like, you really do hope that a teacher who moves to another country to teach a language also cares about the culture of the language they're teaching in. And that's what makes language teachers pretty amazing when they move away, right? It's like an English speaker who says, oh yeah, I'm committed. I love the Japanese culture. So when they go and teach English to the Japanese culture, you hope that that English teacher is, projecting all of their idiosyncrasies and their understanding of the culture they came from. However, they are also interested in the culture they are teaching in. When you pick up any other native speaker, right? If you pick up a native speaker and they're like, oh yeah, this person speaks really good Japanese, and then you ask them for advice, do they only speak Japanese? Do they only do Japanese things? Do they only frame everything in Japanese? Then to me, objectively speaking, not even maybe objectively, like semi-objectively, one of the most reasonable conclusion is that that native speaker cares nothing about your culture, or very little, and they are probably ill prepared to offer advice that's relevant, right? So the idea here, I think, Gabriel, is to emphasize the idea that not all native speakers are ideal to give advice on speaking. It's kind of like the internet, where the internet thing, like I worked 10 years as a ... and then that somehow gives them all the credibility, right? It's like, wait a minute, wait, hold up. So are you saying, say the word is scientist, or even I'll go even better, a biologist? Okay, so you worked 10 years as a biologist, and then this person says something like, I know how to teach everything about biology. Okay? Okay? This is not a jab at the claims. Say this is true. All right? Say this is true. 10 years, this person actually knows everything about biology. Teach me about biology. And then this expert goes on and spouts all this information. And they didn't even ask. What is your background? How do you learn? Like, do you even know biology? Do you want to be a biologist? This right here. This right here is that on the Dunning-Kruger curve. But it's not, because if the biologist is over here for biology, they are here, right here, for emotional intelligence and people skills. Because this person did not ask or even know who are they even talking to? Like, who are they even teaching? What if this person is an engineer? Even weirder, like, what if this person thinks biology is a hobby and they don't want to work in science? They just think biology is interesting. So this person is going to go out and do their best thing without even knowing if they can even relate, offer any advice that's relevant to the person. So that, to me, is step number 1 when you need to select for, quote unquote, a good, maybe an applicable method or methods. Personally, I stick with methods because putting all your eggs in one basket is hoopla. It's something, I don't even know if I said that right. Sorry, my Keikona is slipping out. Putting all your eggs in one basket or methods, that is like saying you hope that this one method, you placed all your hopes onto one method, thinking that you are arrogant enough to think that you can determine right off the bat, right off the bat, right here, that the first couple methods you pick are the best methods for yourself without self-evaluation. Usually as you're learning, you'll come to realize that you need more methods. The first methods you pick are rarely ever the most ideal. It is all dependent on your interface with your sources and your own competence. So, no, Duolingo isn't always going to be the only thing I do. And it didn't. I started with Duolingo. Now I do like 6 or 7 different other things. Thanks, Manifest. Thanks. Ganbarimasu. Hai, ganbarimasu. That's kind of the idea, right? You're gonna go into this point where it's like, oh yeah, I don't know if I'm ever gonna get this. But the idea is that It's always self-adjusting. So the step one is you have to self-adjust, right? What are your skills right now? Who are you looking for? What can you do right now? The last thing I feel, the last thing I feel about people offering advice or you deciding what to do is much like jumping into the final boss, right? Jumping into the final boss. If you know you're ready for the final boss, then jump in. If you don't, then don't. Right? Figure out what you need before you jump into the boss. But the thing is, you have to be able to do that. Step one is often skipped. Can you tell how good a method is? Do you even know that? Like, how can you tell a good method from a bad method? I think that's probably the first question. This is also, by the way, step one of the scientific method. A lot of times that people skip over. Step one of the scientific method. Determine what your problem is. Collect, determine, and determine what you're asking. Like what is your question? What is your problem right now? Characterize it. Characterize the problem, right? You need to characterize the problem, ascertain the feasibility of the problem. Most people determine what a good and bad from a bad method is what other people say. And that's fine. That's okay. That's actually okay. That's part of the equation. It's part of the equation. Okay? Now that you know what other people say, what other people's XP, did you characterize other people's what they said, what their XP is, and then determine if it's relevant to you. What are your characterizations? What's your background in education? What you already do? What you haven't done before? What's new? What's old? Right? Are these things relevant to you? This is critical thinking. This is what I emphasize. It is critical thinking that is necessary for problem solving. Right? Following what people say and what their XP is zero critical thinking. You actually done nothing yet. You have not done any critical thinking at all. You didn't analyze anything. You didn't do anything that you contributed to it. You have accepted this as truth. You have accepted all these things as truth, right? And it can work out. It will work out if you try enough. If you try enough people's advice, it will work. I agree that by chance it will work out, and that's why I say try different methods, right? Constantly try different methods, because if I ever go back and suggest that you should think about things before you try, it will make it very difficult. So I'm trying to be as sensitive as possible, or at least the way I am able to. I tell people to try as many things as they can. Try many things as they can. Because most of the time, nowadays, the social norm is to find someone they sort of relate to, which is healthy, because you want to find someone you relate to. When you can find someone you relate to, there's a higher chance that whatever they do and whatever they say is relatable. So when they give advice, there's a high chance that happens. So to circumvent most of these things, I encourage people not only to try many things, but to interact with more people, or even have parasocial relationships with more people. Invest in people, because those people will have many things to offer, and they are more likely to have relatable advice to you. Fine, if you're learning Japanese and you're an English speaker and you live in the United States, scout around and find an American who speaks English, who happens to love the Japanese culture and cares about the American culture as well, right? Because if they care about the American culture, they are more likely to give you examples, analogies, and be able to frame most Japanese learning experiences that are relevant to you. It doesn't matter if you don't sound like a native speaker, in my opinion. That relevancy, you will feel like time flies, right? Because everything you do, you're having fun with this person. You're relating, and whatever this person says, it makes it feel like they can connect with you. So that connection is priceless. It circumvents grinding against someone who doesn't care about your culture and doesn't care about your problems, right? So even in a parasocial way, when that person like screws up, you feel it. You're like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay, I have that same problem. What did this person do? Oh, okay. Meanwhile, if you're learning from a native speaker, it's like, well, that native speaker probably, there's a high chance that native speaker never had that problem in the first place. So what are you going to observe them for? You have to observe them for the things you want, but they won't solve your problems because they don't have those problems, in my opinion. They may. So you get lucky. There's a chance the things they do can solve your problem. You're taking a chance. It's still less of a chance on someone who already has done it. And that's kind of the idea. I know people tend to focus on the downstream effectors, right? Jump to the boss. What is the boss? Start learning Japanese. That's the boss battle. Okay, not becoming fluent in Japanese. The boss fight is how to start Japanese, self-evaluate. This is called endgame, in my opinion. That's when you already beat the boss. So, and you can keep going back. Like some person who's before me, like an expert before me, could be even before me, and their boss is the one before. But generally speaking, where I am now is advising people, right? Advising people on how to be consistently happy in being in habit formation. Because honestly, I actually think most people skip this part. Like when you jump into Japanese learning, for example, and then you adopt a method. And they're like, "Oh yeah, this is the only method, or these are the methods I need for the rest of my life." For the rest of my life. That's their mindset. Like, I'm gonna use these methods, I'm gonna learn Japanese, and then I'm never gonna need anything else. My thought is, so you think that these methods you're starting with, where you're incompetent, basically you're incompetent about yourself and about the target language. You're inexperienced, and you're telling me that you know for sure that these are the methods you need for the rest of your life. There are some absolutes in life, in my opinion. Like, I don't say things that will or never happen often, but there's a few things that are absolutely true in life. Things don't stay the same. They don't. Literally every second is not the same as the last second. Right? Unless you can time travel. Maybe there's someone out there that can time travel. But things don't stay the same, regardless of how much you want. So, for me, I advise people to find a source of inspiration, both in themselves and others. That it doesn't matter which method you start with. It doesn't matter, or it does matter, but what you start with, because you could start earlier, but it's less significant to concern yourself. Like it's not as a burdensome. Like you don't get angry or frustrated as much if you know that whatever your source of inspiration is, it will change with you. What is my inspiration? What are my sources of inspiration? Other people who love language learning. They will always continue to change with me. So I don't care what I start with. It will work out because there are other people who will be able to help me along the way, as long as you stay open to it. Like Italians with gestures, or Irish English breaking words a lot. Yeah. I'm guessing it goes back to that whole natural thing and unnatural thing. Are you helping for your own needs, or are you helping someone for these needs, etc.? Yep. And people give advice to suit themselves. Yeah, that's what happens a lot on the internet. Endgame is a few years from now. Oh, it's not even. Endgame is life. But yes, endgame ends with death. When you use it in your daily life, yeah, for sure. Am I also streaming on? Yeah, I typically stream on Twitch, actually. Yeah, thanks XD. So there you go. There you go, guys. I think Gabriel comes up with some of the most wonderful opportunities to talk about things. By the way, all the things I said, they all work. I'm gonna, like, they all work. I don't think one, in my opinion, it is harder. It is harder. This is not where you think it's going. It is harder to be dissatisfied. Oh man, this is such a negative. Maybe. Yeah, we'll use this. It is hard to be dissatisfied when the choices you make are your own. And what I mean by that is, not only do you make the choices, there's a part of you in the choices. There is a part of you in the choices you make. So what I mean by that is, the next time you go and see a native speaker, if that native speaker, say the native speaker is your friend, like I would love to make a friend of a Japanese speaker, right? But that Japanese speaker also, by chance, also speaks English. If that person is able to teach me and use analogies in American culture, and I can exchange and do things about Japanese culture, that is unbelievably more meaningful and powerful compared to someone telling you exactly what to do, and you follow exactly in the footsteps of someone, and you're practically living the life of someone else. And most of that becomes dissatisfying because you can't meet the criteria of someone else. The reality is you are not that person. You are not you are not that person. Why try? Or like what I mean is, why not add to it, right? Take whatever you learn from that person and make it your own, right? So that's kind of how I feel about people's dissatisfaction with things right now, because they trust immediately words without critical thinking. So, okay, use like my advice. Someone gave me an advice. Someone said, "Oh yeah, yeah, Anki." I tell you, I can't tell you how many times I keep hearing Anki. Anki. Oh, Anki is 10 times faster. Anki is 10 times faster than Duo. Trust me, bro. It's like, okay, if I trust the bro and I go and use Anki and it's less than 10 times faster than Duo, then I am dissatisfied. Right? I am dissatisfied. Whose fault is it here? Ultimately, whose fault is it here that creates this dissatisfaction? A lot of times people would project it onto the person who provided the advice. But really, you have to wonder if you're dissatisfied with yourself for trusting this person about something you didn't even think about. I take this person's advice and then I continue to confirm it with other people, because for now what I'm doing is perfectly all right. Yeah, all right. My thought is, show me that you learn 10 times faster, and I will show you that I learn 10 times slower with Duo and with Anki. And then let's be friends. Because what happens then is that this person taught me about Anki, and that person learned about how Duo works. This is not a one-way exchange of advice. You give advice freely to be criticized, but a lot of people give advice as though it's immutable to criticism in return. So if that person does not open themselves up to rebuttal, like I do personally, because I want to have someone show me how Anki is 10 times faster than Duo, but at the same time, they have to understand what I'm doing in Duo, and then they do it themselves, right? If I use Anki, is it going to be 10 times faster than Duo? Maybe. It is possible. So I take the advice and I ask this guy, what do you do? What do you do for a living? Like, the person asked me what I did for a living. Like, what do you do? What is your background? What is your background, right? What's your interest? What's your interest in Japanese? Because if those things align, if there are more things about this person that aligns with me, They might be onto something. What did this guy do? This guy literally told me, oh yeah, no, like I went to Japan for 28 days and like I'm the GOAT, and that's not a personality that I resonate with. So it worked for them. The chances are their advice is completely based on themselves and have no knowledge of what kind of character they're talking to. When you go to therapy, right? Be warned, in my opinion, if you go to a therapist and the first thing the therapist said is, okay, follow my top 10 step guide and you'll be okay. And they don't even hear anything about your problem. They don't understand anything. They didn't even, they took their optimized statistical approach, like, oh, this is the statistical likelihood. This is the panacea. Why do you have a job? In my opinion, like, you know, like the whole idea of offering advice at that level is that you understand that you're not peddling a panacea. You're not peddling something that works for everyone, because if it works for everyone and it's on the internet, I'm pretty sure everyone would agree. That is the biggest like science no. Why is secondary language acquisition controversial? Why are people discussing about this? Why is there still competitive competing products on language learning? Because it isn't obvious. So you come around and state that you know the facts about language learning, or you hold yourself up like language learning, then you and I aren't even compatible. So obviously I won't take your advice seriously. I'll still respect that it worked for you though. There's no changing the fact that it worked for that person, I think. Because that person said they spoke Japanese in the 28 days they only spoke Japanese, right? Well, yeah, I can do that too. I'm gonna go to Japan and say, 大丈夫です。いいですね。何をします？こんにちは。よろしく。Like, I could say that the entire 28 days, and I could tell someone I've only spoken Japanese, output Japanese, in the 28 days. So there's no qualification of anything if there's no mutual trust. Like, what is the level of output that you had in the first place? I could tell you guys that I streamed 700 hours of Duolingo without explaining what I did in those 700 hours. I could have been playing Roblox. You wouldn't know because you didn't watch the video. You wouldn't know because you didn't ask. Right? Much like when you take advice from the internet, you wouldn't know if they are selling you a product. That's someone recently suggested like picking up this upstart startup guy who's like being trendy, and they use like all these jargon words to repackage quality of life maintenance of people's like mental health and burnout. I'm like, yeah, that's great. No thank you, but I'll keep that in mind. Like, it's not relevant to me. I do not have management problems with my mental health, so respectfully I decline. And honestly, it makes me a little uncomfortable when a self-proclaimed expert, right? Self-proclaimed expert, like someone offered me some advice and they don't know my background, right? They don't know my background. So they offered something where this self-proclaimed expert is a major in neurophilosophy. Okay, sure. I'm not very remote about that, so that makes me worried some more. And then this person has a startup. Which also, they are the co-founder of the startup in which they sell a method on their channel as an influencer for this product. And the first thing when I first click on their channel, the title is focus like a god. Let's just unpack that for a moment. I mean, I'm a pretty, I feel humbly a pretty respectful guy that feels like I can overlook 4 or 5 red flags right away when it comes to critical thinking. But shame on me. There's 1, that's acceptable. 2, 3, 4. You gotta draw the line somewhere, right? You gotta draw the line at some point, somewhere of red flags. The whole trust me bro vibe is getting high here. So while I respectfully decline something like this, it's crazy how there's so many telltale signs of I don't know what the heck this guy's product is targeting, but I'm not the target. And if someone offers advice to me, they would know who I am before offering a targeted advice, right? I don't want to offer advice. I'm very uncomfortable at offering advice to people I don't know yet. So I try to spend some time, ask some questions before offering advice, because you could be offering advice towards someone who is legitimately scared of this type of thing, and I am scared of this type of thing. Focus like a god. What does that even mean? It's clearly not marketed towards me. Not only that, whoever is able to do this with their career is someone I don't trust openly. They can definitely prove it for sure. Like they can have a conversation and convince me otherwise, but I am not the target audience of this product. What it does reveal to me though is the person I'm talking to. So it tells me a lot about the person who's offering the advice. Like, oh, check these things out, check that thing out, check these things out. They're offering free information about me, allowing me to get a little bit better, to understand that person a lot better. This person is clearly a high-functioning person. This person is clearly a high-functioning person. They're very overzealous about things, and they love these like sensational things, and they resonate with it. It works for them, probably. That's why they would offer the advice. This stuff doesn't work for me, unfortunately. But there are other people who do this stuff in a different way, and I watch those people. So I do know people in this like market of productivity and whatnot, and I found those to be resonating, much like language learning methods, right? Language learning methods. There are different repackaging. You can have repackaging. The thing is, I already have influencers who overlap, right? So I go with them. It still may lead to the same methods with different like syntax and different contexts, and then we still end up retrieving similar results, right? So that's kind of the whole language learning thing too. Maku, this advice on following in someone's footsteps reminds me of Chinese culture. It really is. It's something I am very well aware of, and I grew up with. Oh shoot, the dissatisfied advice would help a lot in politics. It had dictators are made. Yeah, it's how dictators are made. Yeah, it really is. You're traumatized with Anki, not because Anki, but because of person saying over and over, use Anki. Yeah, I'm not traumatized by Anki. Anki is a fantastic tool, without a doubt. No amount of like pestering and scamming can remove the objective value, in my opinion, some of the objective value that Anki serves. And I can imagine so many different ways for myself to use Anki. I don't have the time to do so at the moment. It's like I can only do so much in so much time. In fact, this is my priority. What I'm talking about and doing now is my priority. It's not necessarily exploring and optimizing how to learn language. I want to, for me, I want to show what I think of when I go and do things, right? Like I don't choose trivially. This is what I mean, right? I was accused of defaulting to Duolingo. That was literally someone's counter argument to me. They hate Duolingo because it's the default choice. And that's perfectly all right. I think that's fairly reasonable. Maybe like Duolingo is so present in everything that mere exposure, makes people think of Duolingo. Yeah, advertisements, business models. Fair enough. It's very, very different when you're accusing me of defaulting to Duolingo without thought. We're talking about the person. Don't talk about y'all. Am I part of y'all? Right? Am I part of the group you're talking about? Because now we're having a conversation between people. You're offering advice to me, not offering advice to y'all. And that's the problem I feel I see more often than not. Japanese learners offer advice to some imaginary y'all, not to the person they're talking to. Not the person, the imaginary y'all, some sort of standard that happened. I think large language models like the latest ChatGPT 4.0 is very good in learning both conversation and characters. It can be applied very, very effectively, actually. I thought about that, and I was thinking of making plans in order to do something like that. And not for the sake of what people are going to say. Some people are, this is the first counter argument to the ChatGPT 4.0 thing. It's like, but wait, they can hallucinate. Oh, and they can get things wrong, right? I'm like, yeah, so can humans. So can humans. Your point? And then they're like, oh no, but okay, well, hallucinations, they could make up facts and like sound artificial because they're not naturally speaking. I'm like, yeah, so can humans. And here's another one. They're like, but they don't think like humans. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you that. ChatGPT don't think like humans. That's kind of fair. But the deep cut here is most humans are hyper objective. So they act more like ChatGPT nowadays than any. But we're not going to use that. They're going to say ChatGPT is not human. So they're not natural. I'm like, okay, all right. I'll level you with there. But what can you learn from that? And yesterday's comment that I was talking about is, if you know what is unnatural, if you know what is wrong, it also means you know what is right. And I'm not only using ChatGPT. So much like Duolingo, when someone said, oh yeah, but Duolingo is unnatural, I'm like, yeah, it is. And it's very useful because then I know what is natural. So I participate in natural listening and also unnatural thing. What is unnatural? An English speaker learning Japanese. So much like most things I talk about, and when I think about psychology and motivations and stuff, I'm thinking I'm trying to think of most things, not one thing. If you only know what's natural, how can you ever know it's natural? Oh yeah, that's right. Trust me, bro. That's how you know it's natural. So if someone told you to jump off the bridge, I guess that's natural for people to jump off the bridge with a bungee cord. Sorry, the old idiom doesn't age very well. Like the whole jumping off the bridge thing is an old idiom, like an old American idiom. So usually I tack on with a bungee cord. Old habits die hard, but that's an old idiom, right? So there you go, right? You got to know what's not and what is. The things you don't know is important to enlightenment. Sometimes when someone tells me, oh, that's unnatural, right? And I'm like, okay, how do you know if it's unnatural? It's like, oh yeah, because it's different from what I know. I'm like, oh, okay. So now you know what is unnatural. Is that helpful to you? Like, well, no, it's not helpful to you to sound unnatural. It's like, how do you know that? Like, well, because you won't learn natural Japanese. It's like, I don't understand how learning unnatural Japanese have anything to do with learning natural Japanese. Like, what I mean is how it could prevent me from learning natural Japanese. And like, well, you know, like, if you always speak unnatural Japanese, then you can't possibly know what natural Japanese is. But you just did it. Did you not? You just told me that this is unnatural Japanese, but you only know natural Japanese. So how is it not possible that someone who knows unnatural Japanese can't use that point of reference to learn natural Japanese? What is this cyclic argument that you're having with yourself? That happens a lot. I kid you not. It happens a lot. So logic, I'm not an expert in logic, but I certainly at least know that I have a lot of questions to ask, in my opinion. I have a lot of questions. They don't make sense when people try to explain it to me. I might be stupid. There's a chance I might be stupid to understand how someone can present an argument and doesn't see that I don't understand, because like it sounds like they're arguing with themselves most of the time. It's a cyclic argument. I will only know if Duolingo was a bad choice when I finish it. I hope you don't find it as a bad choice, because XD in the end, if you're like me, maybe you're like me, you'll find that it can be you'll find any choice you make potentially useful for the future, right? People make suboptimal choices in order to make optimal choices. You know what's natural because you know what's unnatural. You don't know what's right without knowing what's wrong. You don't know what's a bad choice if you only make good choices. Well, you wouldn't even know if they're good choices if you only make good choices. Why is Duolingo considered a bad app if it's the most accessible? That you'll have to ask other people. It's actually a very interesting question for other people to ask. I cannot process that, so I ask other people. Duolingo was always to help beginners get a step in the language to dip your toes. That was what it was designed to do and still advertised to do. But then that could also be applied to teacher and everything in life you get taught, indeed, as well. And like in math, how do I really know 2 + 2 is 4? Yes, trust me, bro. How do I know 2 is not really 3? Yep, trust me, bro. Should there be a baseline? Well, formal education tried. YouTube doesn't have a baseline. Hello there, Edith. Yeah, and YouTube doesn't have a baseline yet. And that's what I mean by to yesterday or the day ago. I like to believe in the future there will be some standardization, and to your chagrin, Gabriel, it'll be similar to like the whole Japanese gold standard thing. The standardization will be predicated on the majority of people. So when we find out what the heck is the baseline, like how much is YouTube algorithm supposed to tell you what you want to see versus how much of YouTube algorithm is telling you to converge and critically think, those baselines are going to be largely going to be determined by the majority. But there will be a baseline, right? A baseline is a point of reference, a standardization of reference. What is the reference for Japanese? It's Japanese people. Are you a Japanese person? The answer is no. So, is that relevant to you? Maybe. The best answer the tentative answer you have right now is maybe. So keep working at it, folks. I want to leave it on like a positive note. I like to leave it on an encouraging note. When you think of standardization, like the bottom line, that's what the baseline is, XD. Like the minimum baseline, like the thing that everyone needs to do or be aware of. What is that? It is going to be determined tentatively by the majority, the people it applies to the most, the biggest number of group. That's what standardization typically is. So understanding that, in my opinion, exercise critical thinking. Are you part of the standardization? If you aren't, try more things. Find more things and continue to be enthusiastic, and know that if something doesn't work, it doesn't mean that's the last thing, because the standardization might not be you. The standards for Japanese is Japanese people. The standard for English is almost entirely locally standardized. You might be thinking, well, no, people sound like British English or American English. It's like the standards you are being held to are the people who are teaching you English now in your country. Until you come to the United States, until you come to the UK, you are not unnatural around your peers, right? That is the baseline standardization. If there is enough people to create a standard, then you are no longer unnatural. So the moment you go to a place, then their baseline determines whether you reach the baseline or not. That is largely why when you, even in science or like medicine, for example, if the baseline is determined by another country, then you have to meet the baseline of that country. If you go to that country, then you have to meet it. If you leave the country and your country has, or like your collective has a baseline, then you can live harmoniously in that baseline. And I fully accept that, actually. I'm basically embracing that I will sound unnatural in Japanese. I chose to use Duolingo, which most natural speaking people don't like. That is true. That is totally true. Most people think Duolingo, most like native speakers in Japanese, dislike the way the synthetic voice sounds like, right? And all that other stuff. It's totally true. I'm not lying to myself and pretending like it isn't, or it is what it is. But I'm also not lying to myself that I'm not Japanese. I'm not Japanese. So it's not really that big a deal in the landscape. Much like someone says that I'm going to sound unnatural. Well, all right, that's true. Are you going to ask me if I want to sound natural? And I'm going to say yes. It's like, well, then you should go speak to native speakers. Like, I will at some point. Well, it'll be there. But why are you learning unnatural Japanese? It's like, because what's not, it's still extra things. Like, Why not? Why not learn unnatural Japanese? Like, but you're wasting your time. I'm like, you think I'm wasting my time, right? That's what you're trying to say. You're trying to say you think I'm wasting my time. There's a difference between I'm wasting my time and you think I'm wasting my time. Right? So, before you paint yourself as a very healthy, generous, benevolent stranger who's trying to save you from making a moment in your life not very happy, ask the person, are you happy? Because I'm perfectly happy learning unnatural Japanese. Call it a crutch or something. But one day I will also listen and hear. I already do, by the way. That's to dispel some harsh, presumptuous prejudices. I still listen to natural Japanese. And yeah, it's harder. It is harder. I have to work harder to keep track of what is unnatural and keep track of what's natural. Does it bother me? It doesn't. And then someone says like, oh yeah, you know, you got to stop translating in your head. It's going to make you upset. I'm like, okay. I mean, the last time I checked, when I translate in my head, I don't get upset. But are you telling me that you like, so my next question is, do you get upset when you hear Japanese and you translate in your head and they're like, oh yeah, like it's so, it angers me because I want to be fluent in Japanese, you know? Like I want to only think in Japanese. Like that sounds like a problem. So how do you go about solving that? Because I can't tell you how to solve that, or I can't even offer advice because I don't want to do that. And that's kind of how I go and connect with the person. I acknowledge what I don't know. I don't know how to stop thinking in English, or like it's not that I don't want to try to stop thinking in English. I'm not going to try to stop thinking in English. If somehow that ends up leading to Japanese fluency and I stop thinking in English from time to time, that's sweet. That's awesome. That's not my goal. All right. So sometimes things just happen and you won't even know it. It's called emergent property, right? Emergent property. Hello there, Angel. Hello there. You just got here, and I would say about this comment is that somehow he is learning Japanese vocabulary and kanji and some phrases, but when he got to listen to real Japanese, all these will help him. Yeah. I still, like, you know, with all that said, I don't think I'm arrogant enough to refuse people's advice. So I already do listen to natural English. Yeah, it's not a waste of time. And I still listen to Japanese, like natural Japanese. In fact, you know what's funny about this? You've been lurking for the last week. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Angel. Here's one, Fanny. Here's a perspective. If I think one last thing, and I want to transition this into something like really positive for people, okay? Words like natural is perspective, right? It's catered on perspective. It's subjective, right? Much like hard, easy, you know, all the other things, right? Natural. Okay, hear me out. If I think Duolingo is natural Japanese, once I go to Japan, I will be visiting Japan at some time in the future, just to erase any doubts of other. When I go to Japan, all that Japanese, even if I'm doing this, right? All of the Japanese I see or hear is going to be unnatural. Now think about it this way. Let's think about how the memory works, okay? Let's think about how memory works. if I know that Duolingo is my norm, what I understand about psychology, in my opinion, my cursory understanding of psychology when it comes to teaching, is that weird things, positive stress, challenges enhances learning. Not just knowing things. Knowing things enhances learning too, for sure. But let's take one step further. If I go to Japan, how much Japanese do you think I'll learn if all the Japanese in Japan is unnatural to me? I would bet, in my opinion, imaginary bucks. Say like 10 imaginary buckaroos, right? MAKU bucks. That because of how well I know Duolingo, I will pick up unnatural Japanese, quote unquote, unnatural Japanese, as in Japanese I'm not used to, because they stick out. I can compare. This is the framework of how I can determine all the differences and all the subtle differences. Like, oh yeah, you know what? And this is only hypothetical, actually. This is only hypothetical, guys. I already do this. So I compare, contrast Duolingo and my favorite vlogger already. And then I compare this native vlogger to multicultural vloggers. And I can tell you now, the ones that are multicultural do not speak like the native vloggers. And neither of these speak like Duolingo. And I don't speak like just Duolingo, unnatural vloggers, and because I consume all these things. I like to believe that someone doesn't just randomly could link me a vlogger who speaks in English that sounds like me. I like to think that, but maybe there might be someone that sounds similar. You know, spend 8 hours talking on Duolingo, using English and scribbling on the wall of text everywhere and trying to get people to find out how to scribble their own diagrams. Like, I like to believe that I'm not that reproducible. At least I think. Maybe I am reproducible. Who knows? Because I inherited a lot of things. Why do I do this writing thing? College. My college advisor. There are so many things that I'm a product of. I'm the product of all my influences. How many things influence you? Well, some people who follow in the shadows of someone else, right? Only acquires that person's characteristics, right? Like you let's say you want to be X individual and you modeled yourself after X individual. Okay, well then your ceiling is X individual. That's it. You end there. Well, for me, I'm a multicultural person, right? So I'm already predisposed to gathering influences from multiple sources. So, do I sound like a Chinese person? I hope most people say no, but at the same time, do I think I understand Chinese culture? Kind of. Do I think I understand American culture? Kind of. Do I think I understand like multiple things, right? I would like to think that in the future, people aren't going to walk up to me and say, hey, you know what? You are literally like this person over there, and you're not good at it. Boy, that hurts a lot. It would hurt a lot to someone who only has all their value to one thing. Like, for example, go up to someone and say, oh, you spent what? Oh, 7 years on Japanese? Okay, okay. Wow, your Japanese sound so unnatural. And their whole world crumbles because all their all their weight and their value is predicated on that one thing. Ask yourself how fragile your perception of yourself is, because my perception is that if I don't become fluent in Japanese, that's like a small part of me. Like, okay, well then I'll continue to sound unnatural. That's perfectly fine. It's still Japanese. At least in my opinion, I probably offended like 250,000 people at least by saying that my unnatural Japanese is still Japanese. You can call it something else. I'll call it Americo Japanese or something. You can label it whatever you want. It's unnatural Japanese. Whatever makes you feel satisfied about your value, right? If I really love my language, I would love the idea that everyone has a version of their language and that they can still talk to me in that language. Why be selfish? Are you do you think that you should hog the language to yourself? I mean, that's fine too, actually. I mean, good luck trying to do that. If people love you or your culture, they tend to want to, you know, they tend to want to relate to you. So if you're like hogging up your language and being gatekeeping, I guess that just means you don't want to interact with people. And it can be true. There are countries out there with a lot of people, like a majority rule, that hate foreigners. It is possible. That's totally a reasonable thing, and those coexist with countries that are more open, right? So I'm not saying it's bad or good, it's perspective. From my perspective, I don't care if your English sounds like something I can't understand. I will learn to understand it. That's what the fun part is, right? If I'm having trouble understanding you, it also means I'm inexperienced as well. And you're inexperienced, right? Let's be inexperienced together. Instead of the whole Japanese thing where it's like, oh yeah, no, you'll never understand this. It's like, all right. I'm sorry to meet whatever lofty goals you have of me. We just met, by the way. Nice to meet you. I know I shouldn't be shaking your hand right now because you basically criticized me for all the things I've done. Like, oh yeah, you should quit Duolingo. Meanwhile, 800 hours of Duolingo. Thanks, bro. Like, bruh. Like, I'm not your bruh. You just said that I wasted 800 hours. What? Who's? You're giving me mixed messages, bruh. Bro. If I'm your brother, you wouldn't treat your brother like dirt. Obviously, that's not what they mean. Bruh is bro and stuff. That's kind of I'm not edgy enough to understand what they mean anymore. Let me read. It's not a waste. I assume you already listen to Japanese and consume a lot of input. Yeah, I do. I consume a lot of input actually. But then what happens if something like a big turmoil happens in Japan? New words are created like the bomb dropping in Japan. Those American immigrated Japanese people now live in different cultures. That's a tough one. I actually listened to lots of interviews on the anniversary of the atomic bombs, right? It's a very, very important thing to keep in mind when it comes to like war and hate and stuff. So, and circumstances. So, I often watch more and more interviews as time goes on about that at the anniversary. That's the same with like September 11. Like, you interviews constantly to see the sentiments of these things, like historically. You can see this on YouTube. YouTubers comparing their ability with Japanese with other YouTubers who speak Japanese in a high level. Yeah, that's a thing. That's a really big thing. It's a trending thing as well for anything, even Japanese, but mountain climbing and stuff. However, different communities have different ways of celebrating. Like, it's a lot of communities is humbling instead of being like jabby and throwing shade at people. So there are communities that respond by throwing beef at each other versus versus being humbling. I watch mountain climbing because of Magnus, and Magnus does this thing too, like, oh, what it's like to spend a day in a life as the strongest man and kind of thing, right? It's interesting because I think that Japan culture will die. There will be a lot of people that speak Japanese, a lot of American immigrated Japanese, but the culture will slowly die. Cultures change is what I can say about that, XD. I don't think Japan will die due to foreigners learn. Cultures change is what I would say. Preservation is possible if it's sustainable, right? And if you're encountering sustainability issues, then it will change. But when we talk about cultures dying and whatnot, well, in the timeline of things, it's much like most things in history, right? If you're concerned with that, XD, are you not concerned with what Japanese gain versus what was lost when Japanese was created? XD. Like, for example, if you're really concerned about the future of things, does that also mean you're concerned, you know, the richness of what you have now is also the consequences of many others dying away. It's not like it's always constantly expanding. Cultures, demographics and stuff is contracting and expanding all the time. Rest in peace, Latin. So I don't necessarily think being too deterministic about that is it's something worth thinking about, but perhaps hopefully it doesn't make you cynical about change. All right, that's the end. What was my take-home message? I need a take-home message. Try things, right? Try things. Self-evaluate using critical thinking. So that you don't end up having all your eggs in one basket. Right? Stop yourself from feeling dissatisfied with following choices that aren't your own, or even partly your own. Sometimes when you invest some part of you, into those choices, in my opinion, rarely are you dissatisfied. Someone told me to get a college education, but I also choose to put a lot of myself into the college education. As a millennial, a person who's upset with their college education is deflecting the blame and have not contributed anything to that choice. They were told to get a college education, and it didn't meet the expectations of why they were told. So they are dissatisfied with their college education because they weren't in it. They don't have stakes in the college education. I have stakes. I stake myself in the things I do. It creates ownership. For better or for worse, ownership makes things work. Most of the time. Right. Don't get burned by promises that you didn't think about and you didn't accept before you do it. I'm gonna be right back. I gotta go to the bathroom. We'll chalk this up to another video, and I really gotta review some vocabulary. I'll be right back.